In Heads of State, the UK Prime Minister and US President have a public rivalry that risks their country alliance, but when there's a threat that comes about against them, that all leads on to their reliance of each other that leads them on to resolve the issues. Welcome Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Heads of State is over on Amazon Prime, now available to stream. So let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Heads of State. Was it good, was it bad, or somewhere right in the middle? Let me know all your thoughts, and taking it right in a positive, Heads of State is a thrilling action film that really bleeds onto the nature of the chemistry and dynamic duo of John Cena and Idris Elba playing those respective roles as a UK Prime Minister and the US President. That also brings in Priyanka, that comes about within this prologue and coming out in the third act of this film, bringing about some prominent performances that are pretty good in the way you expect some of the things to play out. It has a relatively familiar action film, but it can be safe in the nature of where you're following along with the story. Nothing too unique or fresh, but that also brings in something that's a relatively good flavor to go about this film within its quick pacing that does elevate some of the action sequences that are pretty well filmed. This is filmed by the director of Nobody and Hardcore Henry that really does bring about a distinct style in the nature of where you're following about. The comedy isn't always the biggest thing, but it can have its few hit or miss moments that really does highlight what this film can ultimately bring out of its storage. And that also goes on to me referencing Jack Quaid as a performance leading on. He only has a 5 to 10 minute lead to where you're going on about halfway through the film, but his performance and everything that's going about on that scene is the best scene of where this film is leading on, that I'm really a fan of what they took, and I wish we saw more of that, but it's ultimately still forgivable for the nature of where the rest of the story is headed. He doesn't fully fit within the whole thing of the film, but you do get some innovative filmmaking, an overhead shot, some creative use of how he's fighting against the bad guys during that time that does bring about some interesting ideas throughout where you're headed. And of course, if you're looking at the setting as a whole, there is a different change of pace to where we're looking, different countries, different landscapes, in buildings, out of buildings, in cars, in planes, and just going about all those different forms of transportation that changes up the pace of this action pace, never making it too stale within how you're following along, what you're looking at. That really does bring about something interesting. John Cena does perform quite well for what makes him stand out a little bit, and Idris Elba as the UK Prime Minister does feel like he's familiar in that role, which doesn't bring anything too spectacular out, but fans of all of these actors that I mentioned will bring about something that is a real treat for those that are fans. Which takes me into the mix elements. Of course, like I sometimes mention, there's aspects of this film that people miss or connect with it better because of the factor this is your average action film. It was thrown straight to streaming, and I think it's for good reason. It's not necessarily something you would really be rewarded by going to the theaters. You're not getting a treat by having seen it in the big screen rather than on your TV at home, so it's a proper use of what it's doing with all its element, which can be unfortunate, but not necessarily bad in the respects of what it's aiming for, being relatively simple, not having this big complex arc, and there's certain aspects along the way that go about this relatively stale setting. While you're changing things up, you're also following about certain things where if you're not connecting with the characters, you're not fully gonna get invested with the story, to which some of these characters you're sort of getting the public rivalry that does bring about the banter between the two, but not fully forcing a good concrete drama or things that make some emotional strides more impactful within the grand focus of this film. things are relatively predictable, though there's a few plot twists here and there. It's not necessarily the big flamboyant reveals that make you shocked at how everything come about. You may be surprised, but that's not necessarily going to go about the grand focus on impacting a strong force against what you were really expecting. Nothing game-changing in the face of what this genre offers, or even what this film offers, that really changes the pace of where this film heads on to. While there can be great scenes here and there, the ultimate impact of some of the ideas can be relatively generic filmmaking for what you expect out of an action film. This franchise and this general idea of the genre hasn't necessarily run dry, but you've seen it and you've done it before, so it's all up to whether you are a fan of the action genre. That really depends on how much more captivated you are to begin with. Which takes me into the negatives, to which there's parts here and there that can be a little convoluted. Certain things with the politics, to which in one sense you want a little bit more about the political intrigue, certain aspects that are explaining more about their rivalry, but not also going too deep into where they're explaining certain forces. And there's some aspects to where they are providing the character development where you're getting most of the screen time from Elba and John Cena, of course, but there's certain aspects about the side characters that it felt like you're providing a little bit too many characters, or at least not giving them enough time in order to flesh out understanding of these different motivations for these different nuances within the levels of the bad guys, who is the secret role, who is the good guys that are all helping. Certain reveals don't come out as strong because you're not necessarily getting the emotional attachment to some of these characters and understanding on where they came from, understanding on how they're really protecting different forces. And of course the whole premise to begin with is a little far-stretched. You have to suspend your disbelief, which isn't too bad in the grand scope of the story, but there's also aspects where you can't necessarily really go about. It's not necessarily too outlandish, which is how it's utilizing its plot armor, but of course, for an action film where these US presidents, this UK Prime Minister is all involved, they have to venture out on their own within the wilderness. There's so many different plot holes or different things where you have to wonder how they get from one place to the other, providing different plot armor, and all doing it in their own suits, that you don't necessarily see the skills that they have to begin with, and they just so happen to surface when it's needed, not necessarily extending the amount of how they're able to fight, but when they are the ones that are meant to be protected, there are parts of the film where they really go out on their own and are able to fight out certain things in ways that is maybe a little bit of a stretch. And I'm a fan of some aspects of where they take the moments of this film, but ultimately there are some things that it's once again a seen it done that sort of film that leads on to the forces of what you may be familiar with, what you're wanting fresh out of this sort of film. So ultimately there's different moments here and there that ultimately can impact how much you ultimately enjoy out of it. And while there was one highlight scene out of the whole film, such as Jack Quaid's whole sequence, there's also one downgrade scene, which is unfortunately in one of the very last action sequences during the final battle. Won't spoil how it comes about, but there's a slow motion scene that didn't take place at any other point of the other parts of the film, and it's a longer slow motion scene, so it unfortunately becomes everlasting in a way that impacts it negatively. That was my strongest negative experience, and given its most prominent ending part of the story, it unfortunately kind of removed me out of the whole setting, which wasn't a good way to finish off what was ultimately coming out of the villains, how they're taking them out as a whole. So that was just my personal thoughts on Heads of State from Amazon Prime, which I have to rate as simply 5.5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Heads of State. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? We all have our own different experiences, and I love to enjoy a discussion down below what you thought of this film. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or is it somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're now going to see the film or not, based on my reflection and review. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.